Wake up! The weekend is here. This is the Friday edition of our first week of Mic'd Up, Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now, Mike and Mike in the morning as we guide you through a series of topics in and around the Pittsburgh sports scene. Hit them as quick as we can and then let you go about your day. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti once again back at it. Of course, Mic'd Up is always brought to you by Martin Lawn Service, as you can hit up Martin for all your lawn care needs as Mike moves there to catch that full sign. Martin Lawn Services, 412-849-5894. So join me to take a swig as we start off your Friday morning and kickstart you to a weekend. And let me tell you, we have a weekend that's going to be eventful just because of the conversation that's going to be around the water cooler on Friday, or whatever fun maybe is had for Pittsburgh sports fans throughout the weekend, because there's now an answer to the Steelers offseason, and the Steelers offseason main number one question that before anything else that we'll get to in a second, none of that really mattered. None of that could occur until this decision was officially made. We heard rumblings, there were reports, people tried to break news. They got close to breaking news. It was not official until Thursday, as Ben Roethlisberger last evening, ends up officially signing, as he ends up signing a deal. He will be the Steelers quarterback next year. Who knows about after? There's been some restructuring. He takes a $5 million pay cut, lowers the cap about $15 million, brings them reportedly $3.6 million now under the salary cap. All this information over there on SteelersNow.com. It appeared Ben was going to be back. He did say he wanted to come back. He was willing to take a reduced salary, was willing to restructure, as Cam Hayward already had done for this team that was cap strapped. It was going to be a $41 million cap hit that Kevin Colbert and Art Rooney II made it clear that was not going to work. Obviously, last year, Ben made some mistakes at the end of the season that clearly hurt them and ruined the season a bit after the 11-0 start. But still, 3,000 plus passing yards, 3,800 plus actually to be exact. Ends up with a solid season overall in terms of stats, maybe better than some would have thought. Mason Rudolph on this roster as the backup. Haskins now there. They aren't going to bring anybody else in. There's no other splash move. So, Mike, with Ben willing to restructure, with him taking even a bigger cut than some would have expected, actually, and now that he's going to be the starter and back for at least next year, we'll leave the rest again to be a question mark. But what are your thoughts? Are you happy that Ben is back? Do you think this was the right move? And do you think Ben Roethlisberger is the Steelers' best option at quarterback for the 2021 season, realistically speaking?
Yes, and yes. No.
Yeah, could be.
Yes. I never got into the train of thought that Steelers were going to go with anything other than Ben Roethlisberger. When you have somebody with a $41 million cap hit, and you're going to have to pay him $24 million, whether he's going to be here or not, prior to his restructuring, it just didn't make any sense. It's not as though you're going to be able to go out there and attract somebody for a season better than him. That just wasn't the case. It was never going to happen. And now that he's here, yes, are they going to be the favorites in the division? No, but that's not because who's at quarterback. Is he the third or fourth best quarterback in the division? People like throwing that out there. I see. I forget. I read a couple. Well, I sure the hell hope so, considering he's 40 years old, and the three other quarterbacks in the division are number one overall picks of the draft. Yeah. When I'm looking at the Steelers' five
much younger quarterbacks too.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's such a low fruit argument there.
Right.
When I look at the Steelers' five biggest problems heading into next season right now, number 7 isn't among them. They have so many other issues to worry about. The Steelers won't be successful. If the Steelers aren't successful next season, it's not going to have to do with who's playing quarterback for them. It's going to be because of a bad offensive line. It's going to be because of nobody running the football. It's going to be because of nobody pressuring the quarterback if they lose Bud Dupree.
Right.
I could name bad offensive coordinating. So many other issues that could go wrong for the Steelers. It isn't about Ben Roethlisberger, despite what people want you to believe.
Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger, a polarizing Pittsburgh athlete, to say the very least, a polarizing Hall of Famer that I personally don't feel is appreciated for what he has done. I put this poll up last week, and I do believe that if you look at the different era, you look at him individually, and even what the team accomplished, I could certainly make a case he's the greatest quarterback in Steelers history, even with Bradshaw winning 4 rings. If you look at the stats, they're not even close. And a lot of Steelers fans don't really give him the credit that maybe they should, or that maybe other fan bases would. A quarterback that had won championships and that has done what Ben has done. And remember also, many of those years, including the last title, even though it was over a decade ago, Ben led a pretty porous offensive line. Yes, the defense was great, but it's not like the offensive line has always been amazing. Marquise Pouncey was a great offensive lineman for him for years, but it's been weak overall at times and been able to make up for that. I will say, though, to disagree a little bit, there is a possibility that the quarterback position could be a problem next year. For me, Ben is the best option. I have no problem with bringing him back next year. They simply were not going to make a splash trade. They're not even probably going to bring in Sam Darnold. They weren't going to certainly weren't going to trade for Watson like some fans were dreaming. It just wasn't going to happen. The Steelers weren't going to do it, and the reason why is what you said. They have way too many needs. They traded up to get Devin Bush. They made a trade to get Minkah Fitzpatrick, which ended up being kind of quasi their first-round pick when they didn't have a first-round pick because of that trade. Those were more surprising moves that are not normally what Kevin Colbert does. And yes, he's willing to do that now, maybe closer to the end of his career than the beginning.
But here's the other thing, Mike, is
I don't think this move wasn't there for a better quarterback option.
If you go back and look at the narrative of the people, a lot of the people in the media and even fans that are ripping him now, if you go back to 3/4 of the season last season, they were doing well.
MVP.
Oh, they were throwing him out there for MVP. They were throwing him for comeback player of the year. They were trying to make a case over Alex Smith.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, because of how the last 4 games of the season, now they're going to try to portray Roethlisberger as being a 60-year-old quarterback that can't, with a candy arm and everything else. It just can't go both ways.
Yeah. No, and I'm guilty of it too. I was saying he was maybe underrated for an MVP candidacy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But
I get it.
But not you. I'm talking about in general. Right. Either the guy can still play, or it can be both. The fact that he had a bad last 4 or 5 games, 6 games of the season, but so did 52 other guys on the roster.
Yeah, they really, really did. Now again, that playoff game with 4 interceptions. Yes, the yards were there and the completions were there, and they actually were both records for the Steelers. But 4 interceptions and so early in the game, and mistakes were there. And even mistakes since really the Indianapolis game were there way too often for Ben, that he was arguably hurting the team more than helping the team. Granted, the defense played atrociously in that playoff game. There were certainly other issues for sure. The receivers dropping passes. There was a game that he had 20 incompletions, and 10 of them were off receivers dropping passes. So it's not like it's just Ben who was the problem. Granted, if he plays like he did the last 5 weeks, including the playoffs, that's not good enough to probably win you a division. Certainly not good enough to even be in the playoffs. Prior to that, when they were 11-0, he was doing enough. He wasn't amazing. Maybe in retrospect, myself and others saying he was an MVP candidate, that was probably ridiculous. He wasn't doing it himself, but was certainly managing the game and doing well enough for a team that was playing well around him. It did look like his arm was a bit weak. It maybe looked like he was injured. That could have been part of it with his age. That's a concern. I keep harkening back, though, to the fact that Mason Rudolph, yes, him and Duck got you almost in the playoffs a year ago, but it's not like I believe Mason Rudolph would be doing any better than what Ben did last year, and there was nobody else to get. So if he's willing to restructure, if he's willing to move the money down, if he's willing to move them below the cap and actually take less than others even thought he was going to take, kudos for him for actually doing it when a lot of other Hall of Famers would just churn cash and hurt the franchise or cause tons of drama about what's going to happen. He did it early enough. They're able to make some moves prior to the draft, and he moved the cap number as low as he possibly could. So props to him for doing so. And again, I don't think there was a better option out there, including who's on the roster for next season. But he needs to play better. And I will say that I think the leash is shorter, that I don't know if they're going to let him have 3 or 4 consecutive weeks of just playing bad. I would imagine that there might be some directive this year that, and probably even in that closed door meeting with Ben, that I'm sure they told him, if we're in week 9 and then we're in week 12 and you've thrown 12 interceptions and you're not playing well, even if we're also not playing well around you, we might make a change. Because Mason Rudolph, and this is what Kevin Colbert has said, has progressively played better. I don't believe he's the franchise, but I do think the Steelers believe Mason Rudolph can win them a few games. So if Ben is throwing interceptions, I wouldn't be shocked if that Ben who we saw at the end of the season and in the playoffs appears throughout next season, that he does not get benched. I think that could occur this year more than last year.
Yeah, I think there's no question. Ben's going to have to make adjustments. He's going to have to get along with. He's going to have to.
It's a new offensive coordinator now.
The way he plays quarterback a little bit with a new offensive coordinator.
Right.
There's no question. But the Steelers better, as an organization, better realize that this isn't the Ben Roethlisberger of the mid 2000s.
Sure.
This is a 40-year-old Ben Roethlisberger that needs an offensive line to protect him.
Yeah.
He can't have turnstiles at the offensive tackle. And he also needs running backs better than Jalen Samuels, Benny Snell, and a James Conner that plays well once every 4 games.
Well, I hear you.
It goes both ways. Your quarterback could be good, but does he have receivers? Yeah, I think he has good enough receivers to win. I think he realizes that. Does he have tight end? I think he has a pass-catching tight end. They still need to get a blocking tight end. But as far as his running backs, they're a joke. What they have.
And it's become
not good enough for him to. Yeah. Ben Roethlisberger, when he's at his best, when he had Jerome Bettis, when he had Willie Parker, when he had guys that were able to carry the ball 20, 25 times a game, he doesn't need to pass the ball 40 to 50 times a game. And if he's not asked to do that, yeah, I think he can win. If you're going to ask that guy to throw 40-plus times in a game, then I'm sorry, you're going to probably get 3 interceptions in a game.
Yeah, 68 completions, I believe it was exactly in that playoff game. Yes, it was a record, and he did joke with us that he'll throw it 70 if he has to, but that's not a winning recipe. No. It's never been, not even in his prime. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti here on Mic'd Up, Pittsburgh Sports Live's Mike and Mike in the Morning, again brought to you by Martin Lawn Services. Now, Mike, you kind of alluded to this a little bit as we quickly move through this. Ben is there. Ben is back. He restructured. It will allow them to make some moves. They do have a little bit more wiggle room now, but there are tons of needs, as you mentioned, running back, potentially the secondary, depending on what happens, other members of the offensive line needing to show up outside of Marquise Pouncey, who is now retired. What is the next big move or decision the Steelers need to finalize to have a chance next season of getting in the playoffs and then beyond, regardless of Ben? Because we agree, and I think everybody agrees with this, there are so many other weaknesses right now, and they do need to correct them now more than ever, because now it's another year of Ben being older and coming off of a poor end of the season.
Well, I think the biggest thing that – there's 2 things. Number one, they have to find a way to get their best player in a contract, and that's TJ Watt. His number, the more you wait with him, as the Cowboys found out are finding out with Dak Prescott.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, the numbers are going to continue to go off.
They're going to end up paying him $40 million or losing him off, and he's not nearly worth that, right?
It just doesn't make any sense. You know what you're going to get out of the guy. He's a sack machine. He's 2 years in a row, he's a finalist for he's in consideration for Defensive Player of the Year. Pay the piper, find out what you need to get him under contract and do it. Aside from that, it's going to go back to the quarterback. This has to be Ben Roethlisberger's last year with the team.
Right.
So you need an answer to that. The answer isn't Mason Rudolph. I don't care what he does. Mason Rudolph, he's a good backup. He's a guy that can maybe come in for a couple game stretch if your starter gets hurt. If Mason Rudolph is asked to be the Steelers' starting quarterback for 16 games, Mike Tomlin would have his first losing season as a Steeler head coach. Who's around him? He's not good enough. They need to go out and find somebody who is good enough and who's their quarterback of the future. So that means whether it's drafting somebody and they learn and they're understudy for Roethlisberger for a year, whether it's going out there and trading for a young quarterback and having him on the roster like the guy in New York, Sam Darnold. You need to go out and you need to have a quarterback that we know 2022 season, he is our quarterback. They can't go into the offseason next year hoping to find a quarterback. That guy needs to be on the roster this year. And if he needs to sit all season, or as you mentioned, if Roethlisberger struggles, if it's a veteran guy that can maybe handle it, that's fine. But that question needs to be answered this year on who the next quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers is. And that's up to Colbert and Tomlin to find out whether it's the draft or however they want to acquire him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a little scared for Steeler fans that might be them thinking, okay, we don't have to do anything major. Maybe we'll stick with the roster. Haskins is low risk, high reward. Maybe there's still talent there. And I know, and they've kind of said this, Mason Rudolph, who played well in that Week 17 game, he did lead them to almost the playoffs the season prior with Duck, even though I agree with you. He's not the future. I don't believe in him moving forward. But I wouldn't be worried if I were Steeler fans that he maybe is what they think. They may think they're going to give him a shot a year. I would not be shocked if they think we'll give him 1 year if we don't love somebody because they know they can't get Justin Fields. They can't get Trevor Lawrence in the draft unless they make crazy trades. There's probably no one else you fall in love with. For me, I believe in Sam Darnold. I think he's dealt with an insanely asinine scenario with the Jets in which they've had different weapons, no offensive line. Mike, his head coach was literally talking smack against him in press conferences. He's had no chance to have success. I would love to get him anywhere that has anyone who's sane who would try to help him. I think that would be a great move. I don't know they're going to do it, and I am nervous for Steeler fans that they're just going to try to give it to Mason or think that Haskins could somehow be that lightning in a bottle and not be drama for them. But who knows?
Yeah, I agree. I think trying to get somebody like Darnold when you're the Steelers and you have so many other needs
can be hard.
You know that getting somebody like him is going to cost you multiple draft picks. And if the Steelers are at this point, they're in a very close to a rebuild. I think they still have enough players around the team where it's not, they're not going to be one of the worst teams in the league. But these next couple years, their draft is going to be what pulls them from being an okay team back to a team that can possibly contend with whoever the best team in the league is. So I'd be a little leery of giving away a ton of draft picks. I'd rather acquire the quarterback through the draft, target a guy that you like, whether it be first or second round. You could probably find a good quarterback in the second round, maybe the guy from Florida. But yeah, that's the only thing that would be a deal breaker for me with Darnold is I don't know what the Jets would want for him, and they're not gonna. Well, who knows though? As you mentioned,
his value might be low. I mean,
maybe they would give him away.
Yeah, it's clearly not working out there. He doesn't want to be there. Clearly, it doesn't appear they even want him there. I don't know what they're doing. So maybe you could get him for low. I don't know. Probably that's going to be how they're going to try to rebuild for them, though. They're going to try to probably sell high with Sam Darnold. I will say that the only argument against bringing Ben back, and it's not in terms of winning this year because he is the best option from what they could have for try to win next year, comparison to what else they could put out there on the field, is maybe you're better off having a really bad record and having that first losing season so you get a better position for the draft since they need so much, because Steelers fans may really see what life is like without Ben in the future. And it's very likely they're going to be not a worse team in football by any means, but missing the playoffs for a few years in a row and Tomlin choosing to walk away or something like that. That's very likely the possibility post Ben, because if the draft pick isn't there and there's no one to fall in love with in the second round plus, and you can't worry about trading for a guy like Darnold because you don't want to give up so much else, you're going to probably have a problem since not many believe Mason Rudolph's the answer, and that might be who they rock with. So
I think this might be a topic for another day, but I'm not as I hear that a lot with Steeler fans, and I don't believe that they're that far. This sounds crazy, but I look at their roster and I don't.
It's a good roster. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't. In no way do I think this is some sort of rebuild job. You got receivers
Okay.
that can play. You have a tight end. You have two rush ends. You
Right.
have a first two linebackers, first round picks. Uh, you have Minka Fitzpatrick, and they have too many pieces there for it. If that's the case,
There are
then
some key pieces who are still young too.
right. That's what I mean. They're not you draft a good center, a good left tackle. You find a running back, or an offensive line can make an average running back look very good.
Right.
I'm not, and I don't think the Steelers should go in thinking that this is going to be a 2 or 3 year rebuild job. Maybe a year, yeah, maybe a year and a half. But other than that, if it's more than that with the people on this roster, then that's bad coaching.
Well, we'll see. That's kind of really the phrase for the Steelers here, certainly next season and beyond. We'll see right now. But one thing we know is Ben Roethlisberger is going to be the starter next season, so that has been decided, and we will now see what happens the rest of the offseason with Juju and company. That I'm sure we'll hit on future shows here when that news gets to matriculate through the wire as well. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti, mic'd up here on a Friday morning, finishing out our first week of PSL's new morning show. Hit that subscribe button, by the way. It'll help us get our content to you all throughout the channel. It's free to do so thanks to our sponsors, like Martin Lawn Service there behind Mike. Now, Mike, moving from the gridiron there, moving from the Steelers who grab those headlines, and it's just funny with the NFL. They could be on every one of these shows even when they're not playing. The NFL just owns the news, and the Steelers do so. But especially today or this week and off the news from Thursday here with this Friday show. But news for Pittsburgh sports now. Alan Saunders is in Richmond, Virginia for the Duquesne's appearance there in their conference tournament, and what's going on with Duquesne basketball is they certainly have built things up to where that program was not that long ago when it was semi a laughingstock. That's certainly becoming a contending program now. Pitt going through a roller coaster ride, to say the least, this season, going from many thinking they were going to get in the NCAA tournament after a staple win versus Duke. Al and I talking about that on that post-game show, to kind of puttering the season away, multiple players leaving the program, once again kind of going to have a failed season, really, despite some still believing in Jeff Capel. But I'm going to ask you this interesting question, and I kind of already know your answer, so I'm smirking because we'll see how everyone else digests this. Which team do you believe will have a brighter future here moving forward between Pitt basketball and Duquesne?
I don't think there's any question Duquesne. And people, if you'd have said this a couple of years ago, they would have thrown me in a padded room.
Maybe even a couple months ago with how Justin Champagny was playing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question Duquesne. It's kind of weird. Both teams, it happened at different times of the season, but both teams, because of situations, lost key players this season.
Right.
Pitt, and also people forget that with Duquesne, with Sincere Carey, Lamar Norman, Maceo Austin still isn't back 100%. But what this enabled Keith Dambrot to do this season is rely on 3 freshmen to take those guys' spot in the rotation. And what is done now is show him and the rest of the conference that they have 3 key pieces in their rotation with Tyson Akuf, Toby Akani, Chad Baker, Andre Harris. Those are 4 guys there that are true freshmen that are starting and playing major minutes, and right. The spotlight isn't too big for them. Chad Baker, I've stated a couple times now, I think he is if he can keep his emotions in check, he's had a propensity to get a few technical fouls in games. If he can keep his emotions down, I think he has a chance to be really special. I think Tyson Akuf, the point guard from Detroit, who was a finalist for Detroit Mr. Basketball, he's going to be a really good point guard. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what Andre Harris can be in the middle next season. They're going to need that without Marcus Weathers and Mike Hughes if they choose not to come back. I think Duquesne has really strong building blocks for the future. And everyone that's played at Pitt this year, as far as their underclassmen, nobody, despite them having a higher recruiting class than Duquesne, according to the recruiting services, there's nobody that's put together a string of play that's compared to what those guys have done.
What about Nike Sabonde? Because we talked about him on
he
an earlier morning show, and it's right. Yeah. He's a transfer.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
not like it's
about
been
the future.
consistent.
Even if Nike Sabonde is back next year.
Yeah, assuming he's back next year.
Yeah, he's only going to be here. He's only going to be here for a year.
Right.
As far as the recruiting glass and pieces of the future for the next couple of years.
Sure.
Will Jeffers from Detroit, who was from Erie, was their highest rated recruit. He's had a couple games, and other than that, there's nobody in that recruiting class that you're saying, okay, that's somebody we're going to build around. Yeah. And you can say that, but I also have to be fair about that too, in the fact that I think you have to look at the situations too. You're comparing guys playing in the ACC every night against the Atlantic 10. There is difference there, yeah. but that well, when we're talking about who has a better future, that you can't project how Duquesne would do in the ACC. We have to look at what their situations are, and in the Atlantic 10, I think Duquesne has a chance next year if they could find one more big man. I think they have a chance to be in the upper half of the Atlantic 10 next season, and who knows, possibly get that elusive NCAA bid.
And that would be an elusive bid, because even Robert Morris locally has accomplished that. So Duquesne definitely looking to finally check that off the stat sheet there to be an accomplishment and a feather under the cap of Keith Dambrot, who again has really brought this program up to heights that I don't think anyone would have ever dreamed of even a couple years ago, when they really were a joke that not many had interest in. But there's tons of reason to have interest in now, and those Duquesne fans that have stuck in there, those alums, they're finally getting the fruit of that labor. And you mentioned it, with the conference they're in, it's very possible they could go out of nowhere and win that conference and get on a run in a conference tournament. They wouldn't do that in the ACC with all the talent they're facing, yeah. But they're dealing with their situation. And in college basketball, unlike college football, if you go on a run and win your conference, even if it's lesser, and you play a lesser schedule, you're going to get rewarded eventually in the tournament. Look at what Gonzaga's doing. Look at Houston this year. They played one ranked opponent. We have other schools we talked about the other day with WVU who's played like 15, it feels like, right. And they're fighting off in ranking because of the schedule. So that's just how it is right now. So Duquesne could certainly benefit off of that. And they're coming off of a victory over Richmond, 67-62, to advance in the A10 conference tournament. So again, they're having success right now as we're speaking, not the case for Pitt. Again,
and the other thing is the only other thing that could throw water on the parade, I guess, is every year in college basketball, it's like free agency. You just never know. We look at their situation right now. I'm not saying this as though I know something's going to happen or whatever, but kids get mad at, a coach yells at them or, whatever, and they just get pissed off at the end of the year and pick up and decide to leave. So
Xavier Johnson
has coming back next year. Things look good, but I guess we'll find that out next October. I have a question for you, Mike. Last night, tough one for the Penguins. Started out 3-0. It looked as though it was going to be a laugher, and then Philadelphia comes back, scores 4 straight. And when you're in the situation the Penguins are, as far as points being precious, especially in that conference, losing to the Flyers, it was that was a, we'll see if they miss that out. Who knows? I think it's still too early to be worried about things. Right. But that was a loss that nobody could have saw after the first couple minutes of the game.
It's a bad loss for sure. It's a game blown, and the Penguins can't afford to blow games like that. The funny thing about the Penguins this year, while they're right in the thick of things, and they've been the cardiac kids and have won a lot of these games in overtime and have won weird games. Like, for example, they beat the Flyers the other night without Crosby when Crosby was out on the COVID protocol. That I don't think anyone thought they were going to win that game, because you're dealing with Crosby missing the game earlier in the morning, and then they weren't playing well leading in either after the series prior. But they're only a few bounces away from being one of the worst teams in hockey.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's really funny to say, but it's true. So this is still a team that has talent there. I think one interesting thing that's happened recently that he's getting some credit, but maybe not that much because they're not winning enough, is Chris Letang's turned it on, and he's been the ire of some fans' venom the last couple years. He still certainly needs to be better defensively. He's not who he used to be defensively. He is offensively producing now, including a game winner recently. Problem is, when you have those stars and a star like Evgeny Malkin, and he's just not producing, occasionally assists, but he's just not moving lines. They can't figure out who to play with him. They need to do something to jumpstart this team, and this does bring up the conversation, which we'll leave this for another day, but just throw this out there. They now have some depth defensively they didn't have. Maybe they didn't think they were going to have prior to the season with POJ and how he's been playing, etc. Dumoulin might be a guy that you have to move to get some type of value brought back to this team, even if you like him, because he's the guy who would bring that value. And if you think you're getting in the playoffs and going to do something this year, you need to make some noise. It also could be that maybe Ron Hextall will realize and Brian Burke will realize that this team was very close to being the Detroit Red Wings this year, and maybe they do need to rebuild some things as well. So it's a bad loss, but you just had a great win right before that, so they almost cancel each other out, and it's been up and down for the Penguins. It's hard to get too high or too low. I'll say that. Again, Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti here, mic'd up as we close up shop here for Friday's edition. This ends our first week of our morning show here in Pittsburgh Sports Live. But what we're going to do to end this morning show is offer a bold prediction that we mentioned in the past. So, Mike, Bold Prediction Friday. We're going to produce Bold Prediction Friday here, try to do these on Fridays to see what will happen next week, to see how ridiculous our predictions are, or maybe we're right on the money and somehow hit one of these. So do you have a bold prediction for me for what will occur in the news with Pittsburgh or around the region for next week?
I missed that in the memo.
Okay.
I didn't know it had to be for this week, so I'll do a better job with that next week.
Well, what did you have? It could be
my bold prediction is going to be that you're not going to be able to go back to this one until the end of baseball season.
Okay.
But the Pirates won't. Everyone's assuming that the Pirates are going to be having the number one pick again next season in the baseball draft, and they're going to be the worst team in baseball looking at the roster. And when you look at the roster, when you look at the rotation, it would be hard to make an argument otherwise. However, I am going to say that the Pirates won't be one of the 2 or 3 worst teams in baseball next season.
Okay. Will they be the 4th?
Maybe, but they won't be. I've already seen people and Pirate fans and Pirate blogs scouting the draft at who the top prospect is for the 2022 draft, and they're penciling that in with the Pirates. And
right.
I'm just going to say that this team is going to perform a little bit better. I think some of the young players are going to come up. Hayes is going to be really good. And I'm just going to say that they're not going to be they're going to be bad. Don't get me wrong. They're not. They're not going to be any wild.
Are they going to win more than 58 games? Because that's the projection out there with Vegas. I guess this is what we're looking at.
I might have to go back. I might have to think about that one. But
okay,
they're not going to be as bad as people are projecting.
Okay, that's fair, and we'll see what we touch on here coming up because that's not too far away.
There, Mike.
Yeah, my bold prediction right now that I can offer for this coming up week, and this is going to sound crazy after the segment that we just had here, and certainly bringing up him is not producing enough. I am going to throw out there that Evgeny Malkin is going to have a 2-goal game next week. And it might happen coming up. Maybe it won't happen next week. So if it happens in the next couple weeks, I might still brag about it. But Evgeny Malkin is going to have a 2-goal game at some point coming up. It just has to happen. He's two-town. He's a Hall of Famer. It just him puttering away with a negative with a -1 and 1 assist game after game. He got to break out at some point. And I feel like knowing him when he does, it's going to be in succession in that game. So he also normally plays really well when Crosby's not in there. Obviously, Crosby can come back now. But I'm just throwing it out there. Malkin's going to have a 2-goal game. I almost went hat trick, but I don't feel comfortable enough to go hat trick without Poorly's playing. But I think 2.
If I had to lay a couple nickels on that one, I would I would go in your favor on that one. Yeah, you're right. He's too good of a player to be as average or below average as he's been.
Yeah.
For the start of the season, guys like that, and he'll go score in bunches. Then he'll have a
right.
2 or 3, and then his stats will adjust to where they should be. So
that's what's got to happen. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's inevitable, but we'll see, because it's not occurred to this point, and certainly has been a problem for the Penguins. That does it for our first week, Mike. That does it for our first week on Pittsburgh's version of Mike and Mike in the Morning. There's not one at all right now, so we're putting one out there for the Pittsburgh sports scene and beyond. We'll be back with you to start Monday morning and kick off that week, and that'll be our first full week together here, as we're going to be delivering these morning shows here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Now. So for all of us throughout the Now family of networks and, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live, Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti, that does it for this week. Enjoy your weekend. Stick with us Monday morning. Subscribe to the channel and enjoy the nice weather that it seems like we're going to have. We're going to try to get on the golf course. So we got the snow out of there. So screw the groundhog and enjoy your weekend here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. This, again, was Mic'd Up on PSL.